Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome, infrastructure admins. Today, we're going through a dedicated explainer for your exam prep, and we're zeroing in on a really critical topic, NCP-MCI 7.5, specifically Section 13.5, which is planned versus unplanned failover, and of course, failback. We're going to break down the exact mechanics based on AOS 7.5, AHV 11.0, and Prism Central 7.5. And look, my goal here isn't just to, read facts at you. We really want to guide you through the architectural why behind all these processes. That way, you can confidently crush these scenarios on the exam and honestly, more importantly, handle them like a pro in your actual data centers. So here is our agenda for the explainer today. We'll start with Section 1, why failover types matter, move into Section 2, planned failover, the migrate option, and then Section 3, unplanned failover, activate. After that, we'll hit Section 4, the journey home, failback, dive into Section 5, exam traps and edge cases, and finally wrap up with Section 6, essential facts to memorize. All right, let's get right into Section 1, why failover types matter. So to pass the NCP-MCI exam, you fundamentally have to understand the real-world stakes of disaster mobility. Nutanix handles these different events very differently under the hood. But before we get totally lost in the weeds, let's just make sure we're on the same page with our terms. When we talk about disaster recovery, or DR, in the context of Prism Element, we're basically dealing with protection domains, or PDs. A protection domain is essentially just a logical grouping of your virtual machines, your VMs, and volume groups that all need to be protected and recovered together. When we actually kick off a failover, we're orchestrating the movement of that entire PD from your primary cluster over to a designated remote site. For us, infrastructure admins, mastering this mobility, well, it's literally the difference between a smooth maintenance window and a total resume-generating data loss event. Think of it kind of like this. A planned failover is like a super careful, coordinated office relocation. You pack everything up nicely, turn off the lights at the old place, double-check that the moving truck has absolutely every last item, and then you seamlessly unpack at the new building. It's graceful. An unplanned failover, on the other hand, well, that's a sudden, unexpected evacuation. The building is literally on fire. You don't have time to pack. You just run to the backup site and rely entirely on the emergency supplies you happened to stash there yesterday. The intent, the potential for data loss, and the exact buttons you're going to click in Prism Element are completely different for these two scenarios. Moving right along to Section 2, planned failover, the migrate option. Now, the absolute crucial prerequisite for our planned failover is bidirectional communication. You need protection domain A and protection domain B talking back and forth between the two sites. For a planned migration to actually happen, both the primary and the remote sites must be online, they have to be healthy, and they have to be actively communicating. You are explicitly telling the system, hey, I want to move these workloads from site A to site B right now on purpose. Okay, so what actually happens under the hood when you select a protection domain and click that migrate action link? The exam is definitely going to expect you to know this exact sequence. Step 1, the system creates and replicates an initial snapshot just to get the bulk of the data over to the remote site. Step 2, it automatically powers off the VMs at the primary site. Step 3, it creates and replicates a final snapshot. Now, why power off before that final snapshot? Well, it's to flush all the active memory and disk operations. This ensures absolutely every single in-flight transaction is captured. Step 4, it unregisters the VMs and volume groups and removes their associated files from the primary site, marking that local PD as inactive. And finally, Step 5, it restores the files from that final snapshot and registers the VMs over at the remote site. And because of that super deliberate sequence, specifically, powering off the VMs before taking and replicating that final snapshot delta, the migrate action guarantees zero data loss. Please permanently burn that phrase into your brain for the exam. Planned failure equals migrate, which equals zero data loss. Which brings us to Section 3, unplanned failover. Activate! But hey, what happens when things don't go according to plan? I want you to put yourself in this scenario for a second. It's 2 a.m. on a Sunday. A massive power failure just totally took out your primary data center. Site A has gone completely dark. You obviously cannot initiate a graceful migrate because your primary cluster is dead. So you log into the Prism Element web console at your remote site, Site B. What's your next move? When a disaster like that occurs, you go to Data Protection on the surviving remote site. You select the inactive protection domain and you click Activate. Now, because the source cluster is totally offline, Site B can't ask Site A for a final sync. That's impossible. Instead, Activation simply registers the VMs in the target cluster using the most recently available local snapshot, the last one that was successfully replicated before the disaster hit. And here's the kicker. This means any incremental data generated at Site A since that last successful snapshot is gone, completely lost. Because of this potential for data loss, the official documentation explicitly warns against performing an unplanned failover unless it is a genuine, real-world emergency. All right, disaster averted. Let's look at Section 4, the journey home failback. So once the disaster is resolved or, your maintenance window is over, we begin the journey home. Failback is really just the process of recovering your protected entities, those VMs and volume groups, from the recovery site back to your original primary site, assuming the primary site has been restored and is totally healthy again. Mechanically speaking, failback works exactly like a planned failover, just in reverse. You're effectively just initiating a migrate action from Site B back to Site A. Now, heads up, because this is a massive exam point regarding failover and failback. When these events occur, the system successfully recreates the VMs and the volume groups at the new site. But the volume groups are detached from the iSCSI initiators they were previously attached to. It's a huge gotcha. After the failover or failback event, you, the administrator, must manually reattach the volume groups to the iSCSI initiators and rediscover the iSCSI targets from within the guest OS of the VMs. Seriously, do not forget that manual step. Speaking of gotchas, let's jump into Section 5, Exam Traps and Edge Cases. Understanding the happy path is great, but it isn't enough. We need to explore the specific technical caveats where exam writers absolutely love to test your deeper knowledge. Regarding the migrate process, we know the system powers off the VMs to take the final snapshot, right? But how long does it wait if a VM operating system is hung? Well, the Data Protection Service waits exactly 5 minutes for a graceful VM shutdown. If the VM doesn't shut down gracefully within that 5-minute window, Nutanix aggressively pulls the plug and automatically forces a hard power off. 5 minutes. That is the magic number to remember. Here's another sneaky one. Normally, when you migrate between sites running the exact same hypervisor, the VMs retain their same UUIDs. But if you're doing cross-hypervisor disaster recovery, so, for example, migrating a protection domain from an ESXi primary cluster over to an AHV recovery cluster, all those VM and volume group files are forced to register with a new UUID at the recovery site. If you happen to have applications that are hard-coded to look for specific hardware UUIDs, this will absolutely break them. And for those of you running Hyper-V nodes, you really need to pay attention here. After you migrate a protection domain, you actually have to manually remove stale entries belonging to those migrated VMs from the Microsoft Failover Cluster Manager on the source cluster. If you forget to perform this manual cleanup operation, the documentation explicitly states that catastrophic data corruption might occur during the subsequent failback operation. Yikes. Okay, let's wrap this all up with Section 6, Essential Facts to Memorize. We have covered a ton of technical ground today, so let's lock it in. I highly recommend taking a mental snapshot of this final checklist right before you sit for the exam. Let's run through it rapidly. Number 1, the migrate action is for planned mobility. It guarantees zero data loss by taking a final snapshot after power off. Number 2, the activate action is for unplanned emergencies when the primary site is completely offline. It relies entirely on the last replicated snapshot, which means any incremental data is lost. Number 3, during a migration, Nutanix waits exactly 5 minutes for a VM to gracefully power off before forcing it. Number 4, always remember that failover and failback detach volume groups. You have to manually reattach them to your ISCI initiators. And number 5, if you're using Hyper-V, you must manually clear those stale Microsoft Failover cluster entries to prevent data corruption during failback. So I'll leave you with this one provocative thought to ponder. If your primary site suddenly burns down today, and you are forced to hit that activate button, exactly how much data are you prepared to lose? Mastering these failover mechanics, understanding your snapshot schedules, and knowing exactly how your protection domains are configured, well, it isn't just about passing a certification test. It's about being the administrator who saves the company's data when the absolute worst-case scenario becomes a reality. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and best of luck on your NCP-MCI 7.5 exam. You're going to do great.